The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the weight of an unknown future. Hannah's breath hitched as she saw him, a man, his face obscured in the swirling mist. The vision was sharp, yet the edges remained blurred, as if destiny itself couldn't bear to reveal him. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a silent echo of the tension in her chest. She had never seen a face like his in all her years of glimpsing futures. Fear clutched at her throat, a feeling she couldn't name, yet knew too well. The world around her seemed to fade, as if even the trees were holding their breath. He was someone important, someone who would change everything. But the question gnawed at her, twisting in her mind. Why can't I see his future? Noah's presence lingered in her mind like a shadow. Who was he? Why couldn't she see his future when every other soul had a clear path? The world she controlled, the fates she saw with such certainty, was suddenly clouded. She wanted to step closer, to demand answers, but the force holding her back was stronger than ever. It felt as though the universe itself was trying to keep them apart. Every instinct told her to walk away, to leave him to his own uncertain future. But there was something else, a pull, a connection so strong that it defied all logic. Could it be love, or was it something darker, something even more dangerous? The fear in her chest gnawed at her, but she couldn't let go. Why can I see you, Noah? The air between them was thick, charged with unspoken words. Noah didn't turn around, but Hannah could feel his awareness of her presence, the slight shift in his stance, the barely perceptible tension in his body. His silence was maddening, and her mind raced with questions. She had seen many souls, countless futures, but his was the first that slipped through her grasp. He was a mystery, an enigma that even her visions couldn't crack. The more she studied him, the more she felt something ancient stirring, something powerful and unknown. Was this fate, she wondered, or something else entirely? As she stepped closer, a voice, soft but insistent, whispered through her mind. Do not trust him, Hannah. She had no idea why he felt so familiar, why her heart seemed to recognize him in a way her mind could not. But something deep within her screamed that he wasn't just any man. He was tied to something greater, something dangerous. A force stirred within her, whispering that his presence would change everything. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? That she could see his future, or rather that she couldn't. But there was no time for that. The feeling of being watched intensified, as though an unseen force was pressing down on them both. Hannah looked toward the shadows. Why is it so hard to just know? Her heart raced as the distance between them closed. Hannah could feel the heat from Noah's body, but the air around them remained cold. The magnetic pull between them only grew stronger, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought them together. But the fog inside her mind refused to lift, clouding her every thought. She reached out, but the words she needed to say escaped her. A shadow shifted in the distance. Who is he? She wondered, her voice silent but full of desperate curiosity. Was she truly meant to meet him, or was this all a trick? The footsteps echoed through the narrow alley, each one quicker than the last. Hannah could hear them drawing closer, the faint shuffle of shoes behind her. Panic surged as she darted to the side, but there was no escape. The man was gaining on her. Her heart hammered in her chest, and a cold sweat dampened her skin. Why was he chasing me? Her breath quickened, and she turned the corner, hoping to lose him in the maze of streets. The sharp scrape of his footsteps stopped just as suddenly as they had begun. Silence. Was he still there? Was he watching her? Every nerve screamed to keep moving, but doubt gnawed at her. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes darting into the shadows. There was no sign of him, but the eerie silence didn't comfort her. It only deepened the fear. She had to keep running, even if she didn't know who or what was hunting her. After several more twists and turns, Hannah collapsed against a crumbling wall, gasping for air. Her pulse was erratic, her hands shaking as she pressed them against her knees. The chase had stopped, but the danger hadn't. She could feel it, an ominous presence just beyond her reach. Slowly, she stood up, wiping the sweat from her brow. A part of her wanted to keep running, but another part longed for a moment of peace. She pulled herself together and glanced around, noting the quiet streets that now seemed deserted. This city was too quiet, too empty. There was a deeper secret here, something hidden in the shadows. She didn't know who was behind this, but she would find out. She had to. Something was pulling her into this, whether she liked it or not. As she gathered her bearings, a voice echoed from the shadows. "You think you can hide?" The words were cold, calculating. Hannah froze, her pulse spiking. A figure stepped out from the darkness, tall, cloaked and imposing. He had been there all along, watching her. She could feel the weight of his gaze piercing through her. His presence was suffocating, like a heavy hand on her chest. "You've already made your choice," he said, his voice laced with venom. His eyes glinted with something darker. It was clear that he had been manipulating her from the start, drawing her into his web. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away. But she knew that would be impossible now. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her attempt at strength. Hannah backed away, her mind racing. The voice in her head screamed at her to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. As the figure advanced, another voice, softer, older, spoke from the shadows. "She's not ready for this." The words sent a shock of recognition through Hannah. She turned to face the source. And there, standing in the mist, was the mentor. "You can't hide forever," he warned, his gaze steady, but full of regret. "You've been marked." His words hung heavy in the air. Hannah felt the weight of his statement deep within her, as though the earth beneath her feet had shifted. She didn't know this man, yet she felt as though he held the key to everything. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The mentor stepped closer, his eyes filled with sorrow. "The prophecy," he said quietly. "You've just begun to uncover it, but it's already too late." Hannah stood in silence, trying to process the weight of the mentor's words. The prophecy? She had no idea what it meant, but the fear in the mentor's eyes made her shiver. The world she had known was now shattered, replaced by an unseen enemy and an unknown destiny. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice shaky. The mentor's response was quiet but firm. "You move forward. You have no choice. But be careful, Hannah. There are forces at work here that you can't fight alone." Her heart pounded as his words sank in. She couldn't afford to doubt anymore. She had to act, to face whatever came next. She wasn't ready, but she didn't have time to hesitate. With a deep breath, she turned and stepped into the mist, determined to uncover the truth. There was no turning back now. The evening sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Hannah sat by the stone fountain, watching the ripples in the water. Everything felt unusually calm, almost too calm. A figure approached. Noah. His steps were quiet, but there was a weight in the air she couldn't ignore. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He seemed distant, as though something was weighing on his mind. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. He hesitated before answering, his gaze flickering to the horizon. "Just thinking," he replied, his tone evasive. The tension in his body was palpable, yet he refused to look her in the eye. Hannah's stomach churned. It was subtle, but she could feel it. The change in him. What was he hiding? Her instincts screamed that something was off, but the calmness of the moment lulled her into doubt. Maybe it was just her imagination. Hannah tried to brush off the uneasy feeling, but it lingered. She could see it in his eyes, the uncertainty, the guilt that was barely hidden behind his calm facade. They spoke about trivial things, but the silence between their words was loud. Noah was opening up, but only halfway, and it was enough to make Hannah feel the growing divide. "You know, you can trust me," she said softly, her eyes searching his. He hesitated before responding, his voice low. "I know," but his gaze flickered away from hers again as if he couldn't bear the intensity of her stare. The distance between them had grown, not in space, but in heart. He reached out to touch her hand, but even that gesture felt strained. Something was wrong, but neither of them could name it. Hannah couldn't shake the thought that there was something more, something he was keeping from her. The touch lingered just a moment too long. "I'll tell you everything, I promise," he whispered. But the words felt hollow. The air grew heavier as Noah's words sank in. "I don't know if I can," he muttered, more to himself than to her. His admission was like a crack in the foundation they had built. Hannah tried to hold her ground, but his vulnerability made her feel exposed. "What are you talking about?" she asked, though she was afraid of the answer. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "There's someone else," he said, his voice low and hesitant. Hannah felt the words hit her like a slap. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "You have to understand." "I didn't want this," he said quickly. Pain in his eyes was genuine, but the words didn't line up. "You're saying you have feelings for someone else?" Hannah asked, trying to mask the hurt in her voice. He didn't answer right away, his gaze distant. Was it the prophecy? Was it fate? Her mind raced, but no matter how she turned it, she couldn't escape the gut-wrenching feeling that something was slipping away from her. The silence between them stretched on, broken only by the sound of their uneven breathing. Hannah couldn't process what had just been said. She felt the sting of betrayal cut through her chest. "How could you?" she finally managed, her voice cracking. Noah didn't look at her, his jaw clenched tight. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, his voice low and defensive. She could hear the pain in his tone, but it wasn't enough. The tears she had held back for so long began to spill. "You lied to me," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Her hand trembled as she reached for him, but he stepped back. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice hollow, but his words did nothing to ease the sting of his betrayal. She looked at him, her heart breaking as she realized the truth. The trust they had built was shattered, irreparable. She took a step back, unable to even look at him anymore. "I can't do this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Hannah walked away, her footsteps heavy with the weight of betrayal. She didn't look back, afraid to see the man she had trusted standing in the shadows. Her heart ached with each step, the emotional pain almost unbearable. She had thought he was the one person she could rely on. But now, everything had changed. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and anger. How could she have been so blind? What was real? She clenched her fists, pushing back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. As she reached the end of the path, the cool night air bit at her skin, but it didn't matter. The cold had already settled in her heart. She had to keep moving. "I'll make him pay for this," she thought, her voice silent but full of resolve. The night was quiet, too quiet. Hannah sat in the dimly lit room, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. Her mind was a maze of confusion and doubt, trying to make sense of everything she had learned. The betrayal still stung, but there was something deeper now, a faint sense of clarity forming at the edges of her thoughts. The air felt cold around her, though the fire in the hearth crackled weakly. It was as though the world had shifted under her feet, and she was left grasping for anything solid. A soft whisper of wind stirred the curtains, pulling her attention. She stood up, her body heavy with fatigue. Something was calling her, a feeling she couldn't shake. Her hand grazed the table where a forgotten letter lay. She picked it up, its edges worn, as if it had been read 100 times before. Her pulse quickened. There was a clue here, a truth hidden beneath layers of lies. Hannah felt it. This was where it all began. The truth was close, but would it destroy her or set her free? The letter was a link to the past, a forgotten memory she'd almost let slip away. She unfolded it slowly, the words blurred by time, but the message was clear. Her mind drifted back to the first meeting, to the moment when everything had seemed perfect. Noah had seemed so genuine then, his promises of protection and honesty. But now, as she pieced the words together, she saw the manipulation in every line. "You were always meant for this," it read, but the tone was different now, sinister. She remembered the night she had met him, the warm embrace, the sense of safety. How had she missed the signs? The fire crackled louder, the only sound in the room, and Hannah closed her eyes, trying to silence the pain. The memory of that first kiss still lingered, sweet and hopeful. But now, it tasted bitter in her mouth. What if everything she'd known had been a lie? She couldn't deny it any longer. The pieces were falling into place, and the truth was far darker than she had imagined. The walls felt like they were closing in. Hannah walked through the narrow hallway, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. She had to confront Noah, had to ask him the questions that had burned in her mind since she found the letter. When she found him, he was standing near the window, staring out at the darkened city. His back was turned to her, but she could feel the tension in the air. She didn't speak immediately, letting the silence stretch between them. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable. "What is this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Noah hesitated, then took a slow step forward. "It's not what you think," he said, but the words felt hollow. Hannah felt a knot tighten in her chest. "Then explain it," she demanded. "Tell me the truth." She could see the hesitation in his eyes, the flicker of guilt that flashed before he masked it with indifference. The truth was close, but so was the pain of hearing it. Was she ready to face the consequences of the truth? "You don't understand," Noah said, his voice soft but forceful. "I didn't want this to happen. I never planned for it to go this far." But his words felt empty, like he was trying to convince himself, not her. Hannah felt her heart break all over again, but this time there was no room for doubt. "What is it that you didn't want?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. Noah took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he finally spoke the words she had feared. "I'm not who you think I am. I was sent to find you, to keep you in line." The truth hit her like a punch to the gut. "You were sent to keep me in line?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "By who?" "By them," Noah replied, his voice low. "By the ones who control everything. And I'm not the only one." The walls around her seemed to close in. The betrayal was deeper than she could have imagined. He was never hers to trust. She was just another piece in someone else's game. The realization shattered everything she thought she knew. The truth settled like a weight in Hannah's chest, suffocating and unrelenting. She had spent so long trusting Noah, believing in him. But now, with the truth laid bare, everything had changed. Her mind raced, trying to process the enormity of it all. This was the turning point, the moment that would define her. So this was the truth all along, she whispered to herself, her voice hollow. It wasn't just about Noah anymore. It was about the lies that had been woven into her life from the very beginning. She could feel herself breaking, but there was no time for weakness now. The truth had awakened something in her, a strength she had never known. She didn't know what came next, but one thing was clear: she would no longer be a pawn in their game. She would fight back. The storm had only just begun. The air was thick with tension, a palpable stillness before the storm. Hannah's breath echoed in the quiet room, quick and shallow, as she stood in the middle of the shattered remains of trust. Her fists were clenched tight, her mind swirling with what she had to do. Every step felt like a thunderclap against the silence. The world outside was a blur, but inside, the space between them grew even more distant. Noah moved into her line of sight, his eyes filled with regret. But there was something else there, determination. "We can't keep doing this," he said, his voice low, but it carried an edge of finality. The moment hung heavy like the second before an explosion. Her pulse raced, her heart pounding in her chest as her body trembled, knowing what would happen next. There was no turning back now. He was here, and so was she, and they would collide. Hannah stepped forward, her voice shaking with controlled rage. "You think you can just walk away from this?" she demanded, her eyes fixed on Noah. "You've lied to me from the start, and now you want me to believe you?" Noah didn't answer immediately, his jaw tight. "I never meant for you to get hurt," he said, his voice soft but laced with guilt. Hannah scoffed, the bitterness rising in her chest. "Don't you dare pity me." The space between them closed, each word sharper than the last. She was done with the games. She didn't want his apologies, not anymore. "What do you want from me, Noah?" she asked, her voice cold. "What do you want me to do?" He stepped toward her, his hand reaching out, but she pulled back, every muscle in her body screaming for distance. "You can't fix this," she whispered, her breath catching. Not anymore. There was no more room for words. The fight erupted, physical and raw. Hannah struck first, her hands shaking as she pushed Noah away. His hands caught her wrists, holding her steady but not without pain. "Stop fighting me," he pleaded, but his words only fueled her anger. The tears in her eyes burned as she broke free from his grasp. "You want to help me now, after everything?" The sound of her voice broke through the chaos, trembling with the weight of everything they had lost. But then, there was a sound from the doorway. A figure, standing in the shadows, watching. Michael, a familiar face, stepped into view. He was the last person she expected to see. His gaze locked with Hannah, a silent understanding passing between them. But before anything could be said, Noah stepped forward, blocking Michael's path. "Stay out of this," Noah growled, his voice low, dangerous. But Michael wasn't backing down. The moment between them was suspended in time. Hannah looked at Noah, her breath heavy, her hands trembling. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you betray me?" Noah's eyes were dark, haunted. "I had no choice," he said, his voice cracking. "They have control over me. They've always had control." Hannah's heart sank, but the truth wasn't enough to stop the rage that boiled inside her. "You were never free," she whispered, the realization crushing her. The rain began to pour outside, beating against the windows, as though the world itself was mourning what had been lost. The fight wasn't over. In a single moment, Hannah knew what she had to do. The truth had taken its toll, but she was done running. With a final heart-wrenching glance at Noah, she turned to face Michael. "Help me end this," she said, her voice steady with resolve. The storm outside raged louder, matching the fury inside her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hannah stood in the aftermath, her breath slow, her mind numb. The storm outside had not eased, but neither had the fire inside her. She felt broken, but not defeated. The world had shifted, and now she would shape it. The cost was high. Michael had paid the price for the truth, but the truth was something Hannah could no longer ignore. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself, the weight of the words settling deep in her chest. The air was thick with the echoes of what had happened, But Hannah wasn't ready to mourn yet. She would fight for what was left. She would burn the world if she had to. But she would do it on her terms. The world felt still, as if the very air had frozen after the chaos. Hannah stood on the edge of the broken battlefield, her body numb, the wind carrying the remnants of the storm that had passed. Smoke lingered in the distance, but the calm was deafening. She hadn't moved in what felt like hours. Every breath felt foreign, each heartbeat a painful reminder of what had been lost. The weight of her choices pressed down on her, and though she couldn't shake the sorrow, there was a strange clarity now. The silence was overwhelming, yet in it she found something that resembled peace. The last fight, the final confrontation, had changed everything. But it wasn't just about what had happened. It was what she had become. She had been broken, but she was rebuilding. There was no turning back, but perhaps that was the only way forward. The dawn light began to spill over the horizon, faint at first, then brighter, but Hannah remained rooted in the present, reflecting on all she had gained and lost. Hannah sat in the quiet room, her eyes scanning the remnants of the battle. The aftermath hung like a fog over her mind. What now? She thought. The image of Michael's final words echoed in her mind. His face, filled with pain yet acceptance, was now a haunting memory. The guilt was sharp, biting through her. I failed him, she whispered, though no one could hear. The memories of those she had lost, Michael, Noah, and the life she once knew, flooded her. But they were fading, distant echoes. But there was also relief, bittersweet and difficult to accept. Everything had changed, and now all she had was the truth. This is who I am now, she thought. No more lies, no more hiding. Her journey had brought her here, and as much as it hurt, she had survived. Life would continue, but it would never be the same. And maybe that was okay. The door creaked open, and for a moment, Hannah wondered if it was just another echo from the past. But when she looked up, it wasn't a ghost she saw, it was Noah. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, but there was something else in his eyes now, something more vulnerable. I thought you were gone, she said, her voice thick with disbelief. I don't know if I can forgive you, she added, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. He looked at her, his eyes apologetic, but full of something deeper. I know, he whispered. There was a long pause, the weight of the moment settling between them. Hannah felt the familiar ache, the conflict between what he had done and what they could still be. You don't have to forgive me, he said, his voice strained, but I'm here, and I won't leave again. The silence that followed was heavy, but in it there was something that neither of them could deny. The past couldn't be erased, but the future? It could still be shaped. The next day, Hannah found herself alone in the quiet garden. The morning air fresh with the scent of rain. The memories of Michael seemed to hover around her, like whispers on the breeze. She had learned so much from him, from his wisdom and his sacrifice. He had believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. You must find your own truth, even if it costs you everything, he had told her, his voice a steady presence in her mind. The lessons he had imparted were now hers to carry. She could almost feel his presence beside her, guiding her forward. This is your fight now, he had said. The soft rustling of leaves seemed to answer his words. Hannah stood there for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle over her like a gentle embrace. She wasn't alone anymore. Not really. The legacy of those she had lost would guide her, and it would make her stronger. Hannah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. The battle was over, the truth had been revealed, and now it was time to move forward. Her hands shook slightly, but there was a sense of calm in her heart. So this is it, she whispered to herself, the words simple but filled with understanding. The world around her was changing. and she was no longer the same person who had first stepped into this chaos. She had found her own strength, had learned what it meant to sacrifice and to rise again. With one final look at the horizon, she turned and began walking, her footsteps steady and sure. There was a new path ahead of her, one she would carve herself. Hannah had become something more, someone who could face the future, no matter what it held. The world held its breath. Hannah stood at the edge of the now quiet city, the echoes of the past still ringing in her ears. The smoke had cleared, and the first light of dawn touched the ruins of what once was. The weight of everything felt almost too much to bear. All that had been lost, all the sacrifices, and all the choices had led to this stillness. No more running, no more fighting. She had faced the chaos, and now there was nothing left but the aftermath. She could feel it, the deep emptiness, yet the faintest flicker of hope that perhaps peace was not as distant as it had seemed. But the question lingered in her heart quietly, almost imperceptibly. Was it worth it? Hannah walked slowly, her steps measured and deliberate. The city was changing, and so was she. Everything that had been, those shattered memories and broken promises, was left behind. The winds of change had swept through her life, and she had no choice but to move forward. Her fingers brushed the crumbling stone walls as she passed, a quiet farewell to the past. She was leaving it behind, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. There was no room for regret now, only acceptance. The world would move on, and so would she. This is the way forward, she thought. It was a silent promise to herself, a small but significant step towards something different, something better. As Hannah walked, she found herself at the old memorial, where memories of those lost had been etched into stone. She placed a hand on the cold surface, and the past rushed back in brief flashes. Michael's final words, the weight of his sacrifice, the price of truth. His voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm. You'll find your own way. You have to. Those words carried through the silence, filling the space between them. Hannah stood still, her hand pressed against the stone, as though grounding herself in the legacy left behind. His presence lingered in the air like a breath she could still feel. I will, she whispered, the words carrying a promise she had yet to fulfill. But for now she simply stood there, letting the moment of remembrance fill her. The city was waking up, its heartbeat slow and steady. Life was returning, not as it had been, but different. New faces walked the streets, unaware of the battles that had been fought in silence. Hannah watched them pass, wondering if they could ever understand what had truly happened here. There was no going back to what had been before, but there was something peaceful in the rhythm of the world, turning again. The earth beneath her feet, the sounds of life continuing, reminded her that the world would always move forward, whether or not she was ready. Time didn't wait, and neither can I, she thought. The choices had been made, and now all that was left was to live with them. Hannah stood at the edge of the city, looking out over the horizon where the sun was setting. The air was still, and the world felt at peace, if only for a moment. Everything had changed, yet somehow it felt like everything had also come full circle. She didn't have all the answers, and maybe she never would. But for the first time in a long time, she felt at ease. The fight was over, and with it, the pieces of her life had settled into place. She had come so far, through darkness and doubt, but now she understood something she hadn't before. This is what it is to live, she thought. And with that realization, she turned to walk into the night, the shadows behind her slowly fading into light.